Well, in ministry, there's a lot of challenges and pressures we all face. And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to share with you 7 tips for reducing stress in ministry.
Hey, welcome to Practical Church Planting. My name is Brian Brammer, and with me is Dylan Dotson. And today we are talking about 7 tips for reducing stress in ministry.
And before we jump into that, this episode is brought to you by ambassadorsministries.com. Wouldn't it be nice to have a larger paid staff, to have more leaders that could give dedicated time to the mission God has given to you and your church? Of course, we know the answer to that is yes, but other church plants, often church plants of resources just won't allow for that. And so Ambassadors Ministries, that's ambassadors plural, wants to help. They enable you to hire leaders you've identified by coaching them to fundraise a full, part-time, or supplemental salary. And the best part is it doesn't cost your church anything. And so they support them in all the administrative tasks of fundraising so you can focus on the hard work of church planting. So check them out, ambassadorsministries.com, and grow your staff team, probably people at your church that you'd like to invite on. And many of my conversations with church planters, they don't think about inviting people to raise support. And so a lot of other ministries do it. Churches can do it as well. And so again, ambassadorsministries.com, or you can click the link in our show notes and connect with them. And check it out. Highly recommend it. Now, today we're talking about reducing stress in ministry. You know, before we get into this, I saw a tweet by somebody the other day, and you know what? I'm gonna pull it up right quick.
Got some good resources
because we're talking about reducing stress. This doesn't really have to do with stress per se, but it can. I think our perception is often reality, and so we can create problems when there's not. It was by this guy named Clay Smith. He's a pastor somewhere. He says, I attend a lot of pastor conferences, and the theme is usually don't quit, it's hard, but hold on, which is a needed message for sure. He goes on to say, I would also love to attend a conference one day where the theme is, can you believe we get to do this? What a privilege. This is awesome. And so I do think that's part of this, is that I think if we just assume ministry is always hard and miserable and difficult, then it will be hard, miserable, and difficult. And I just think our perspective, there's also a really great privilege of what we get to do, and so that can help. And so that was just a side note. Yeah. Here we go. Number 1, consistent preaching prep rhythm. Now, we've had various episodes on this. You can go to the Practical Church Academy. I do various things on the Practical Church Academy, but one of them is like a monthly training. So my one in February, which is last month, was my entire sermon prep process, not so that you can emulate me, but that you can create your own. I also share what my sermon prep setup looks like, and my sermon notes and how I organize them. And so if you want a deep dive into how to create a process that you can trust and doesn't stress you out, check out the Practical Church Academy, or you can search other episodes in Practical Church Planting. So this is a big one for people that preach regularly. But even if you don't preach regularly, if you have like a task that you do pretty consistently that takes a large amount of time, this is also the same thing. But again, so oftentimes, at least when it comes to preaching, you got everything else going on, and so you're kind of doing sermon prep last minute or whenever you can fit in times, instead of being proactive of here's when I work on sermon prep, for example, and I just work on it. I don't meet with people this time. I don't move it around. Now, obviously, if exceptions or emergencies come up, that's different, but they have to be exceptions. And if you're doing it multiple times a month, that's not an exception. That's just how you're doing it. And so you need to have a consistent preaching plan that you can trust so that you're not stressing every Monday morning, how am I going to come up with a sermon this week? And so we've got various episodes on it. Practical Church Planting, or Practical Church Academy also goes into a deep dive on it. But you want to create a rhythm that you do every single week and that you don't move from it. It's okay to alter it as you're trying to figure out what you want your rhythm to be. But if I was hey, what's your sermon prep process? And it's oh, well, sometimes I do it on this way, and sometimes I do it this day, and it just kind of depends. That is not a good process, and that will lead to you being stressed out. So you want to have something consistent that you do the same way, the same time, the same place every week.
Yeah, so I don't preach as much as Dylan does, but he's going to have me.
That's right. He's coming up soon at New City Church.
I have preached before. It's just been a while, and I would say it was stressful because every time I went to prepare, it was different. Every time it was different, and so and that's on me. So it just made me stressed out, and it didn't have to be.
Yeah.
And so I kind of high-strung anyway, but I'm finding out that in order to kind of have some great teaching prep rhythms is also having other good rhythms in your life, so that you're not finding time, you're making time and sticking to that. So
it's also, this is a challenge for people that preach regularly also, obviously, but this is also a challenge if you preach, not regularly, because what can happen is you have all this time to do it. And so you're always working on it and tweaking it, because it's never a sermon's never done unless you give yourself a deadline. And so I even think if you preach every so often, once a month, once a quarter, or whatever, even finding, okay, what is my sermon prep rhythm going to look like? And just do it. Like how far, when do I want to work on it? And when I'm done, I'm done. And not just being like, I'm going to continue to tweak, continue to work, because you're going to get diminishing returns anyway. And so even with that, it seems like, well, I've got more time because I'm not preaching for like, let's say another month. But like I would still put on my calendar, here's when I'm working on it. And then that's it. And you can, have feedback and that sort of thing. But even then it's like, don't keep doing it. Just find times to work on it and then work on it then and do other things other times. So
do you find that when you do that, you actually get more accomplished in that small amount of time? Like if you're dedicated, like, hey, 3 or 4 hours rather than an hour here, an hour there.
Brian, you don't want me to get on my soapbox,
okay,
do you?
Got it.
I do, actually.
Right.
The answer to that question is yes. And again, we've done preaching episodes, so this is true. Deep Work, one of my favorite books. I highly recommend it, especially for pastors, because preaching is often such a big time suck and waster because we're not efficient with it. So you could use his principles for a lot of stuff, but especially for preaching, which is like, I read that book a couple years ago. It's by Cal Newport, and it just like changed everything for me. And so especially for preaching, I follow a lot of the principles, or preaching, writing sermons, I follow a lot of principles in that book. One of the things for me, and everyone is different, but like I have dedicated, like on Wednesdays, I'm prepping a future sermon, and 8 to noon is like, that's all the time I give myself. Now, part of that is I've been doing this for a while, so I don't need as much time as I had before, and so all that sort of thing. But like, people think that 4 hours that's not very much. Now, I'm not done 4 hours later because then I review it. We have a sermon review. But like the studying, writing is 4 hour block, and that's generally it. And sometimes it goes over, but like that's pretty rare. And part of that is like I got 4 hours. I'm not checking my phone. I'm not checking my email. And what happens is when you give yourself a deadline, you often not only meet the deadline, but you meet it ahead of time because like I've got to finish this or else. So I like to analogize it. Whatever, to like when you go on vacation, like when you have a vacation coming up, you somehow do like twice as much work in the same amount of time because you're leaving and it's not going to be done. And so it's like you do this week's work and next week's work in the same amount of time. And the reason is you are focused because you have a deadline. And so artificial deadlines with sermon prep, I'm really a big fan of those because then it's like you're focused on it and then you move on when you're done. So that's a recommendation. That's a side note, but consistent preaching prep rhythm will help you be stressed out. You have to have a process that you can trust so that even when you're working on it and it's not 100% done, it's like, oh, I know, like I'm still going to work on it this time and this time, and you can step away from it rather and contrary to like, I'm just going to work on this here and then there, and then who knows when I can finish it. That's not going to be helpful. Number 2, creating ministry work boundaries. So we talk about this a lot. Talk about this a lot with the assessments I get to do with Acts 29 because most pastors don't have these just because we haven't been thinking about them. So proactive means not reactive. So one of the big things we'll talk about is like how many ministry nights a week you will do. So for Christine and I, part of this depends on kids, married, the age of your kids, what you have going on. This is not whatever. I mean, everyone's going to be different. There's not like a right or wrong here. Like for Christine and I, for the age of our kids right now, it's 2 times a week. And so, and one of those is a community group when we're leading groups and when those are in session. So it's like one other time a week, we'll do something ministry related. So sometimes you got to push things back, but it just helps our marriage, helps our relationship with our kids, that they know we love them more than the church. So yeah, you need to have proactive boundaries because again, an empty calendar, it's hard to say no to people because it's like, oh, my calendar's, I don't have anything on the schedule there. But if proactively what you can say yes and no to, like an empty calendar slots are good things to rest and be doing this for the long haul. And if not, you'll burn out really quickly, do a lot of things you probably shouldn't be doing because you think you got to do everything. But creating ministry work boundaries proactively to help you say yes or no to things can be really helpful.
So I'm not married, don't have kids, just dogs. So those are my kids. But Paul talks all about this New Testament that, if you can stay single, you have more, your attention isn't divided, and so sometimes you can divide your attention with other good things. Was it Tim Keller says, don't let a good thing become a God thing. And so for me, I might technically have more available evenings that I could do, like more than Dylan, but that doesn't mean I have to. I'm at this point in my life choosing to pursue this life of singleness. And so with that, it means I am more available, but I still need to have those boundaries. Yep. And when I have an email that comes in at 8 o'clock at night and it's not an emergency, I don't need to be responding to it. Yep. And Dylan gets on me all the time. He's like, well, Brian's going to respond to this before I hit send. And so it's just, it's a habit I had from previous employment and stuff like that. It's not a bad habit, but it's not a healthy habit. Like it's kind of neutral depending upon
Yeah.
what else I'm doing in my life, my other responsibilities. So if you don't have, a family or kids or that type of thing, you still need to set up boundaries because if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't help take care of others in ministry.
Yep. Yeah. And I think part of this is just like, we're just products of our cultures of like instant response, email, text, social media. And so like we have to untrain ourselves a little bit, not to do so. And so, yeah, these boundaries of like, when am I going to work? When am I going to not? Recently, we just created some new staff values at New City. And one of them, there's like what we do or who we are and how we work. And one of the things that we have for how we work is that we work hard and we rest well. And rest well means not just like I take a Saturday off. It means like I'm not checking my email all the time, and I'm not just checking it. It's like I'm not feeling like I have to.
Yeah.
And it's like it's okay. Like for us, like we're really big, especially if you listen to the podcast. And not be able to not surprised. Like you do respond to your email because email comes from people, and we're not going to ignore people. But it doesn't mean you have to respond even within the hour. For us, it's just like within 24 hours is the goal, unless it's like the weekend or your day off or you're out of town doing something else, then obviously that's fine. So it's not right away. It's just have rhythms of, hey, here's when I'm going to work. Here's when I'm going to rest so that I can make it over the long haul. And that means going slower than you might think you should in the moment so that you can go further longer because you're not quitting or burning out and that sort of thing. So creating ministry work boundaries proactively is really helpful. Now, the third one kind of goes with it. Decide when you will and will not meet with people. So again, this a little bit depends on your role. If you meet with a lot of people or whatever, but this is, especially for pastors, this can be a difficult thing, especially going into sermon prep, because it's kind of like, when can you meet? And it's like, well, I'll reach out, and it's like, you'll meet. Anytime that people want to meet, you're like, I'll be there. Yeah. And again, I would just argue this isn't healthy. You need to have times where you can get your work done so that you're not like stressed and worried, and that so you can be productive when you need to be productive and focused, and then meeting people at other times. So for me, I've shared this in the past. I use Calendly. I use the free version. At some point, I'll probably use the paid version because the free version, you can only set up one type of meeting. And so it's like, sometimes it doesn't really matter. But you can use the free version. I've used it for a while. And it syncs with my Google Calendar, and it just has all my available times. And I don't know, hardly ever. It is extremely rare because I typically say, pick any time on my calendar that works for you. And if these times don't work, let me know. We'll figure something else out. That hardly ever happens. Now, again, part of this is where you live. We live in Raleigh, in an area where there's a lot of like white collar work from home, flexible schedules, like not a lot of knowledge work, not necessarily a lot of blue collar work. That's a thing. Yeah. But like, so it's their schedules might be a little bit more flexible. So obviously, you have to account like where you live and everyone else's work schedules. But it works super well. And for me, like I don't meet people in the morning, like 8 to noon. Or till like noon on every day except Thursday. It's at 11 because I've done a lot of my like focused work by then typically, and it's just taken. And you can schedule things throughout other times of the week where you don't want to have meetings and that sort of thing. But like you just link it. So if someone in a new city wants to meet, it looks like I have tons of free time, but that's fine. Like, and then I just kind of put my work in and other places like that. But decide when you will and will not meet. So for me, it's not the mornings, and it just makes it super easy to send the calendar invite proactively, and almost always people will just pick a time that's available for you.
So I think for me, most of the people I have met with are usually in my community group or some others that are on the serve teams, and so their schedules aren't as flexible, believe it or not. So I'm having to probably after working hours when they're available. So what that means is...
they just don't like Brian as much.
Yeah, that's true. They're like dreading meeting me like, I think that was okay.
Brian's a great guy.
But I would say for me, it just means that if I'm going to meet later, then I just leave the office or I stop doing some other work earlier. Mm-hmm. It's like it doesn't. You're not tacking this onto your day. You're kind of shifting your hours, and sometimes that can be inconvenient because I do like to get stuff done and the rest of the day not think about it. But again, you want to make yourself available, and it just takes discipline to like, okay, I wanted to go to the gym or I want to do this. Mm-hmm. You go in the middle of the day, which is weird for me, but
that's people.
Yeah,
nice.
That's true.
I do think that's to point out. It has nothing to do with Brian or I's likability, but it does have to do with your role. Does determine people's flexibility to meet with you. I think so. Like, oftentimes when people want to meet with me, it's because they want to talk about something, and they're more likely to be like, "Hey, I just want to meet with you." Like, I'll kind of make it work. Whereas, especially like if you're how do you say this? If you're the one, if someone's requesting to meet with you, they're going to be more flexible than if you're the one requesting to meet with them.
Yes.
If that makes sense. And even in my position as lead pastor, even if I'm the one like, hey, I'd love to meet with you just to catch up, there's still probably, and I I think you get this. Like, I'm not amazing or anything like that. Like, just to be clear. But when you're the one like preaching mostly from stage, there's like a connection that people have with you that they don't have with everyone else because they hear from you often. They feel like they know you. And so I do think there is, depending on your role, I do think that matters. Like, if you're a lead pastor, people are more likely to kind of conform to your schedule. Or if you just have a, whatever. And if you're not, they're probably more likely, maybe not as likely to do it. So I do think that comes into a part. It is easier for me to set up schedules to meet people than it would be for you, just because of my position and all that sort of thing. So that does come to point. But to Brian's point, if you are having to do those evenings or whatever, moving around your schedule, especially if you have the ability to do so, we'll talk about your schedule in a second, is really important so that you're not doing all this. I remember the first couple of years of New City thinking like, you got to work 9 to 5 because that's like what you do. And then anything else at night is like extra. And like, I feel like, yes, I'm like doing more things. And so it took me a while to get comfortable with like, no, like if I got like, let's say a night of like three things on a week, which is an exception. Like I will move things around because it's like, oh, I need to be healthy and I don't need to feel bad going home at 3 o'clock to do some other stuff around the house or whatever. I spend time with my kids because I'm not going to be able to do it tonight. So, So all that to say, decide when you will and will not meet with people and adjust your schedule accordingly if you need to do that.
Stick to it.
Yes.
Because people will notice and be like, oh, well, last time, you met here, maybe he'll be able to do that again. So that's...
Yeah, so I think, so that goes to the ministry work boundaries. This also goes to, again, I think this has to do a little bit with your position. I have greatly reduced the amount of places I will drive to, especially like the last 2 years. Like I'm very much like within 10 minutes of our church. Now, Raleigh's a kind of big area, so I used to be really big on halfway between, like if someone's coming from Wake Forest, whatever, depending on who they are, I might be a little more flexible, especially if they're someone who serves a lot or whatever. But typically it's like, I just felt bad. Like I always had to go to people, but people like, they get it and they don't assume that you have to like go all the way to them. And so typically I'll offer up, they'll pick a time on my calendar, and then I'm the one who picks the spot, or I'm the one who offers. So I always say I'll follow up with a spot to meet, place to meet. I'll typically ask where they're coming from, and if it's not too far, it'll be somewhere around the church, or I'll go a little bit further. But I typically won't drive more than 15 minutes, and it's not because my time's more valuable than theirs, but it's like back and forth. And if I'm meeting with 1 or 2 people, a day, or for a couple of days a week, that does add up. And so, anyway, number 4. Remember, you can only do what you can do. This is something we say often at New City Church, and I think this is one of the big stressors in ministry. And so I do hope if you listen to this podcast consistently, this is something that you also will take to heart. You can't do everything, and it's really easy for us in a social media online world to look at the big churches who have more staff, more money, more resources, and feel like we need to emulate that. And you can't. And I think we know, like, intellectually we can't, but we still feel the pressure to do so. But, like, here's a really, like... we do this a lot of ways at New City, like how we do community groups. Like we don't multiply groups. We've got various episodes on small groups. I would just say this: if you go to the Practical Church Planting Facebook page, recently I posted a Google sheet of all of our episodes, so you can. It's like pinned to the top of the Facebook group. Or I said page. I meant to say group. You can click on that and just like search keywords, and you can find all of our episodes on like small groups or preaching or whatever. But like we have people that sign up for groups, and Brian's the one that coordinates them, so he can speak to this. And it's like for what you're looking for, here are the nights and here are the groups available. And like, we can't make something up here at the end of the year. And we do everything we can to get them connected and involved. But like, we also like, maybe this sounds bad, but like, we don't stress out too much if we can't meet everyone's preferences, because we just can't. Like, we can only do what we can do. And so that's just a practical way it plays out, not letting like someone signing up for a group and not having their specific night and their specific age range, because we don't have 35 groups that are meeting. And so you only can do what you can do.
Well, and to add to that, like, I would say there are other touch points, other ways to reach out to those certain people. So I recently had someone reach out. They just moved here from the West, and they're wanting to get connected, but they live probably about 45 minutes to maybe an hour south.
It's probably about 45 minutes, maybe. Yeah, it depends on where they live. But yeah, that's more than you would typically.
Yes, and they were asking if there was groups there. I'm like, well, we might have one in a town that might be 30 minutes from you, but that town is still 20 minutes from us. And so I introduced him to a couple other guys that were his age. And so the encouragement there was they can still reach out and hang out with them outside of their group time. And then so they're creating relationships to where he's like, it is further, but I really, really want to go. I'm really connected. I'm going to make sure I plan out an hour and a half round trip to go see these guys because of the impact they've had on my life. So even though basically you can't do everything, but I think you can do what you can within the realm and get creative with that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So only can do what you can do. So do everything you can do, but then like you can't, like we're not going to have a group that meets in for that. We don't, right? I mean, if we had a bunch of people that live there, you know, we probably wouldn't because that's kind of far away. We don't have a group that meets in the town that he's from, and we could feel really bad about it, but it's just like we can't, and so we don't. Another Prodigal Ways plays out New City. You know, we recently went back to 2 services, 9:30 and 11, and we do New City kids only at our 9:30 service. We don't. I mean, it would take more people to serve, and obviously more kids. We don't really need 2 services right now worth of kids, but it would also be a bigger serving commitment, and like. It's just for us, like we're not there yet where we want to double the people serving in kids ministry. And so, so I think that's one thing too, is sometimes people run out of space and they're like, well, I can't provide what you would typically assume kids ministry at 2 services. And we couldn't either, but we needed more space. And so what we can do is 9:30. Now there have been a couple of weeks where somebody has come at 11 and like, we were very clear with our people, but sometimes people don't pay attention or if they're new, I mean, it's on our, you know, on our kids page, on our website, but you know, I get people aren't like, people assume you have 2 services, 2 kids. I totally get it. And it's like, yeah, it's a bummer. We've got some like coloring sheets that we have available for kids as they come in, if they do come up to the 11. And but it's like we could feel like really bad about it, or we could just only do 1 service until we could fully staff 2 kids ministry volunteer teams for 2 services. But we can't, and so again, we can only do what we can do, and so we're doing that. And yeah, it's not ideal necessarily, but like. It's it. That's all we can do. And so we could get really stressed about it, or we could just own it and like it is what it is.
And do that well. Like, so if people come and they like, oh, you don't have children, it's like, okay, now you're here. So what can we do about that? Like, instead of, they can decide if they want to like go back home or go to McDonald's, which is right around the corner. Yeah. But a lot of times, like, yeah, we have those coloring books. So that it's like, give it a try with your kid in the service. We don't mind that at all. Yep. And then maybe next week they alter that. So I think what you do in response, rather than being like disappointed and feeling guilty, yeah, I'm sorry. Like, don't apologize. Yep. Sometimes you want to, like, hey, I'm sorry we don't have this. But what we do have, give them a solution, not, hey, I'm sorry we couldn't provide this solution. Here's a different one. So I don't know, that communication goes a long way with people, and when you're upfront and honest with them about that, they'll more than likely they will adjust their schedule and what they have to do, because they're like, yeah, I want to come back here again.
And if at the end of the day it doesn't work for them, like, you know. You can only do what you can do. Yep. Another way it's played out. So our worship production director just moved to Charlotte. So right now it's kind of split up. The whole area is split between 3 people. So Brian and 2 of the other people are doing the more of the worship stuff. Brian's doing the more of the production stuff. And it's like, is it ideal scenario? It is not. But could worship potentially, I don't know, not be as good these next few months? Potentially. And I mean, it potentially could be just as good. Yes. I mean, it was set up well. Our guy who just moved, you know, did a phenomenal job. You know, his last couple of years, has really good culture and all that sort of thing. But it's not like ideally, that's not the ideal situation that we're facing. And you can get really stressed out about it, or just like, listen, it is what it is. We want to do the best that we can, but you know, we can only do what we can do. And so whether that's like your personal stuff you're working through or the church wide, like, you know, obviously you want to do the best you can, but don't be stressed about stuff that you can't yet provide because you don't have a limited staff, money, and resources. Now, you could have more staff if you go to ambassadorsministries.com. Nice. They throw that in there. But all that to say, you know, you can only do what you can do, and you've got to remember that at the times you're really discouraged. So, number 4. Number 5 is take time for physical exercise. So, again, this is, you know, it's one of those things and where there things are not urgent so that they don't happen, but then we don't. It goes back to like boundaries and, you know, slowing down so that you can last for the long haul. It's like, yeah, going to the gym or doing something a couple times a week, it takes time and effort. It might take a little bit of money depending on what you're doing. And you would rather do other stuff. You know, I get it. I do think it's helpful is once you start doing it and developing a rhythm or habit, your schedule will adapt. Sometimes we're just not good with our time. And so we kind of take longer to do things than we should. But if we have more like disciplines or rhythms that take our time, we're more likely to focus on the stuff we're doing right now. And so it's just like, as you get older, you know, kids in high school or college, I mean, it's not that they don't have a lot going on, but it's like, as you get older and have more responsibilities, like that's actually not a lot going on, but that's all that they've experienced. So it's a lot to them, but like, they just don't have, so the more you have going on, the more you can structure. I think the quote goes, if you need something done, ask a busy person or something like that. That's how the quote goes. It's like they're getting stuff done. Yeah. And so they're like, throw it in there. And so, yeah, physical exercise is important. You got to take time out of your week to do it. If you want to be, you know, we all know like the benefits of it, the mental benefits of it, and all that sort of thing. But if you don't do it, you won't last as long. You'll be stressed, especially when it comes to reducing stress. I mean, exercise literally does this.
Yes.
And so you got to prioritize it.
So I even extend further with physical exercises. So I play tennis often. I'm trying to run more, but like you don't have to do that. Like,
yeah,
no, this kind of ties into the last point. Like exercise, but only do what you can do. Like, don't go in there trying to bench press or run 6 miles, and you might huff and puff going up the stairs, which is like, I do that sometimes too because it's just like this was not a good week or good day. I ate way too much, and anyway, that's a whole different story. But yeah, believe it or not, I do play tennis, and I would say also with physical exercises, like other types of hobbies that allow you to get that stress out. Because a lot of times it can be very bent up, and the last thing you want to do is take it out on loved ones, take it out on the people in your church because they inadvertently pressed your buttons, but they don't know what's going on. So they don't know that you haven't exercised in forever, and it's not their fault, And so, different hobbies, exercising. Just believe it or not, you will feel better about yourself. Like maybe not like during it, but when you're done, you're like, that was a pain, but I enjoyed it. And so try to remember how you felt afterwards, not how you feel curled up in your blankets, not wanting to go there or something like that. So
there's a saying, if you work with your hands, you rest with your mind. If you work with your mind, you should rest with your hands. And so obviously in that category, ministry is a lot of knowledge work. I mean, there's people work too, but you're not like physically making something necessarily all the time. And so, I mean, obviously physical exercise is a part of that, but even hobbies where you're like making or producing something can be really helpful because you can see a finished product, where in ministry, you very rarely see like some finished product. But yeah, you got to put on your calendar and you should do it if you want to reduce stress in ministry. And so it's one of those things where it's like hard to talk about because especially like physicalness and weight, there's so many things that go into it. Like you could weigh more than average, for lack of a better word, and actually be really healthy, and you could be thin and be unhealthy. So it's like, it's not, so there's a lot of factors that go in there, but whatever it looks like for you, if you're feeling a lot of stress and you would say, I don't really prioritize this at all, that's something you want to do. That was number 5. Number 6 is proactively take advantage of your schedule. So we hinted at this a little bit. It's probably your schedule's probably a little bit more flexible, which can be a bad thing in the sense of like, if you have a job and you have to work certain hours and you can't like meet, like it's easy to say no when your job sets your schedule for you. In ministry, oftentimes you're the one that sets your schedule, so it can be really hard to say no to like meeting at a certain time, or whatever, because you feel like, well, I can do it, so therefore I should do it. So this is where like those boundaries come in of like predetermining when you can and when you can't. So I would say that, like Brian was saying, if you got some stuff in the evening, taking some time off during the day or that sort of thing. If your kids are in school, maybe not do so many evening things. Like if they're not homeschooled, if like in public school, whatever, it's like even if you take off time during the day and you can't spend time with them at all, like that would be helpful. I also think this in terms of vacations. One of the benefits of ministry is that, I mean, there's downsides, there's positives, but because we work most Sundays, oftentimes like our family will take vacations during the week. We go to the beach every year. We'll do a couple of small things throughout the year as well. And we go during the week. It's cheaper. So a couple weeks ago, we went to Great Wolf Lodge, which is like this like little indoor kid water park thing. And it was literally $100 cheaper to go, Wednesday and whatever, than like even Thursday. The weekend was like $300 more expensive. And so you can do that out. Like every year we go to the beach. We always leave Sunday afternoon and come back like Friday night. And so Thursday's a little bit more expensive, but like Sunday through Wednesday, any place you stay is always cheaper. And so take advantage of that. And of course, I'm not saying you shouldn't vacation over the weekends and miss church too. You should do that too occasionally. But even with your like vacation stuff, it looks different. And so that can be positive. Now, again, if your kids are in school, I know you've got a little bit of that to adjustment. We actually like Finley, our daughter who's in 2nd grade, we just like took her out of school and she'll be fine. And she is fine. And she loved it. So, so your week-to-week schedule, but even your time off, take advantage of maybe doing it during the middle of the week and stuff like that. It can save you money, which is a benefit.
Yeah. I don't really have much to add to that, but vacations for me are usually doing some of my side gigs, which I enjoy. But then it can be stressful. So then I come back to the work week and like Monday, we do a ton of stuff on Monday. Like our weeks are front loaded. And at first I'm like, oh man, this is going to be tough to adjust to. But
now he loves it.
Yeah, it works out well. It just means I have to.
At least I'm going to say he loves it until he loves it.
Yeah, I'm going to say I love it because he tells me I have to say I love it. But yeah, I don't have much here to add, so I won't.
I mean, but all that to say, like, proactively do your schedule and then move things around when you can. So that is a benefit of ministry. Now, again, it's hard. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not in this area unless you're part of a church staff and you're wanting to plant and you're part of like a traditional church staff. So, traditional church structure is a little bit more rigid, which is unfortunate. I mean, I get it because it's the sign of times and things change, culture changes. I'm not saying one is right or wrong. Our culture is different now. The kind of the more rigid, like you have to be in the office 9 to 5 is difficult because then it's like, but then you also have ministry stuff at night. And so you're just working, you got stuff you're doing all the time. And then it's just, there's no breaks, there's no hobbies, there's no time for rest. Yeah. So proactively take advantage of your schedule. And I would say this too, even if you're a smaller church and you're like, well, I can't take vacation, I can't do this. If you just put it on your calendar, maybe you got to do it a couple months in advance. But if you put on your calendar, hey, I'm going to be gone. Hey, I can't do this thing. You will find someone else to do it because you've decided you're going to be gone. If you always wait for the perfect time to be gone, it will never happen. Yeah. And so proactively put it on there and then figure out a solution on the back end, and it'll actually happen. That was number 6. And last but not least, prioritize space to encourage yourself in ministry. So one of the things that discourages me is, talking to other pastors and some things that I'm involved in, I see is like this lack of, like if there's a pastoral gathering in your area, like let's say there's a monthly gathering, you should go to it. You should go to a conference or two a year. Like I know people like to knock like Christian conferences or whatever. Like one time years ago, I was going to Exponential in Orlando, and there was a group of us that were driving down from the Raleigh area together. And this one guy, and hear me, I don't mean to be judgmental. I'm just trying to share a story. So, and he was like not for it. And like, it was like a 3-day thing in Orlando. He only went to like half the session one day and half the session the other day. He went to like, Universal and Disney 2 of the days. And like, I get it. And he's like, I just don't like to spend a bunch of time around church people. Like I want to be around non-church people and whatever. And it's like, okay. But I'm like, what is wrong? First of all, maybe I shouldn't bring this up. In church planting, you need church people. So a lot of times I talk to church planters who are like, well, I just want non-church people only. I'm like, who's going to like help walk alongside? Who's going to give financially? Who's going to encourage you? Like, the goal is not just non-church people. A church exists to like equip and encourage and disciple the saints. Yes. So you need church people. We want to reach non-church people, but I think sometimes we can swing the pendulum way too much. And it's like, we got to, anyway. But he was like, and I'm like, well, this is like time to like encourage your soul. This is not about like, it's not a sin to spend some time with other pastors. And so I would encourage you to put that on the calendar. One of the things I see is like, oh, I don't have time, or I'm busy, or I've got a lot going on. And it's like, again, in the short term, yeah, I'd rather get my tasks done. But in the long term, if you don't have times where you're like refreshing your own soul and building relationships and being around people who get your industry and understand what it's like to be a pastor or to do the things that you do, and just to have fun together and have conversations, like it's so important. And when you don't put on your calendar and you never do it, it makes it really hard to be in the long haul without being stressed because you feel very alone. And so whether there's like some sort of pastoral gathering in your area or conferences or whatever, like don't be so anti them that you don't give space for your own soul to be refreshed as you do all the stuff you're doing.
I think of, this might be a bad example, summer camps. When I was, youth, and then as I was a leader in college, it's that church camp high, kids, their lives are changed. It's very emotional. Sometimes it's too emotional where there's no, like, it doesn't stick. But the aspect there is you are with other people who are, most of the time, they are fellow Christians. They might invite some people who come to camp that don't go to church. But there is that community that's there. There's this, hyper focus on growing your faith, being encouraged by others. And of course, you come back and life happens and you kind of go back down to that low. But it's that same type of being with other people, learning from them, taking this respite, like taking a time out of like not the daily grind, but you are a minister to people. You do carry their burdens. Yep. Like that's most of it. And so I just think of summer camp. It's not the exact same thing, but every time that I've been like, oh man, I don't want to go to this thing because I don't know, I'm going to miss this or I'm going to miss that. 110% of the time I've been like, I'm so glad I came. Yep. And even if you have to create your own little cohort, maybe some pastors in the area, maybe it's like a 30-minute radius and like once a month, you guys just, I don't know, hang out at someone's house like that. That is better than not doing it.
Yeah. So we've done, like personally, we've had like lead pastors and wives over for dinner occasionally. I'm the area director for Acts 29 in our area, and so we do a monthly gathering, and it's not just Acts 29 pastors. I'll just share what we do, and then if you want to start something like this in your area, because we've done stuff in the past that wasn't as good as consistent. I don't know that this is good, but it's consistent now, and we just started doing it this way. So we meet for 2.5 hours. The first hour is peer-to-peer coaching. So we get around tables of 5 people, and we set a timer. You got to be on top of the time for this sort of thing, and you get 10 minutes each. And so everyone goes around and they share one stress or issue or something they're facing, and they can either ask for prayer or they can take the 10 minutes and have people give feedback. Typically, people are giving feedback. So it's like, I've got this person I don't know what to deal with, or how do you structure your small groups, or what's your preaching calendar, or whatever. And you just get 10 minutes. And as soon as the timer is done, they're done. You go to the next person. Otherwise, the last person won't get time. And so we're like, we set up, we do tables of 5. There's typically 4 or 5 tables or something like that. I don't know. And takes about 55 minutes by the time you start and whatever. And then we do lunch. So we pick up Chick-fil-A. We make them pay for their lunch. Yeah. So they pay New City, and then we pick up the lunch. Box lunch at Chick-fil-A, super simple. And so we actually pick it up like at 10. We meet from 11 to 1:30. And so we pick it up at like 10:30, 10:45, and it's fine. And so at 12, hour into it, I'll interview like a local pastor just to hear their story for about 30 minutes. And as people are eating, and just like ask them questions about their ministry, their life, their experiences, how God's moved, challenges they faced. And then we'll do 45 minutes of teaching. So after that, we'll take another couple minute break, and we'll have someone who's teaching on a topic, and for 45 minutes, and they'll do their 30-ish minutes, and then there's like 15 minutes of Q&A. And so it's 2.5 hours. And people are like, gosh, it's so busy. And it's like, I know, because when I started taking over this, I extended how long it was going to be, and a couple people are like, that's too long. And that's fine. I get it. I would rather raise the bar a little bit and have people that want to be there and actually develop relationships and get to know one another. And so we're only a few months into it. I think it's been helpful. So that's our structure. You don't have to do that, but do something. We just found that like if people felt like they weren't getting any value, they're not going to come. And so at least with the peer-to-peer coaching, it's like they either get value or they've given value. And so then they can hear from other people and that sort of thing. And so that's what we do. But all that to say, you want to prioritize space to encourage yourself in ministry. And I think that also includes time off. So putting on the calendar, but also includes going to things that maybe that week you don't have time to do it. But again, if you put it on your calendar, commit to it, you'll find the time and you'll make it work. So I would just highly encourage you to do that.
And just do it. Like when we started doing this, I think it's the 3rd Thursday every month. Mm-hmm. I think we shaved off about 30 minutes because we got feedback from people.
Yep.
Where like it's not like, oh, we don't want to hang out with these people anymore, but you don't want it to drag.
Right.
Not because stuff isn't good, but people's attention span. You do get to the point where it's like, I kind of want. I got a couple more things I want to do,
yep.
but you can't like help people not think about that, but
right.
they do. That's the reality of it. So taking that feedback to improve it, I think, has been.
Yeah, we're 11 to 2,
yeah.
And I still think that's fine. But I'm trying to combat the busyness of our culture. But I get it. So some people were kind of relieving or whatever, and so we did. And 11 to 1:30 just sounds better. And we're just like, we're taking like after the peer-to-peer coaching, it's like 3 minutes. I mean, that's it. Go to the bathroom, we're starting, and then after the lunch thing, it's like 3 minutes. You can go to the bathroom, but we're just going to start. You got to keep going, otherwise people will leave. And so, yeah. So there's a balance of like we are in a culture of quote unquote busyness. So you can't be like, we're going to meet for 9 hours, and if you don't come, you don't love Jesus.
I don't love Jesus.
Be like Brian.
Yeah, don't quote me on that.
But yeah, so there's that balance there. But don't be like only do like a 30-minute gathering, because then it's like, because we have some guys that drive about an hour, and they're like, this is worth it for my time to drive. What we were doing before wasn't necessarily worth it, and so they wouldn't always come. So that's it. That's 7 tips for reducing stress in ministry. Also, some of the things we talked about in this episode, ambassadorsministries.com. Or in the show notes, if you have people that you might think can raise up to be staff in your church, but you can't yet pay them, check them out. They'll be super helpful. The Practical Church Academy, it's a monthly of a bunch of resources. I've got stuff on there that you can actually send me your direct questions as well, like via like a voice text type of a thing. And I'm happy to answer like questions for your specific ministry. Of course, I talk about preaching for my February gathering or my February training. And then Facebook group on Facebook, Practical Church Planting. Join the group. People are asking a lot of questions. And that's all we got. We'll be with you next week on Practical Church Planting.
See ya.